I'm going to start with scaling robotics. How many of you here have heard of the HitchBot? Okay, before you pick up your phones and start looking, HitchBot was a social experiment. It is basically a hitchhiking bot made in Canada. It traveled across, hitchhiking across Canada, Netherlands, Germany. It was brought to the US, and very quickly, it was decapitated, dismembered, and thrown on the side of the road. The first question I have is a cultural question, and that is to Karthee. Is the world really ready for large-scale robotics with humans?
I think things happen over time, right? So when first internet came about, people worried about privacy and fraud, right? But it was more an exception than the rule. So similarly, I think robots are going to come in several different forms and several different paces. There's going to be odd, vandalism and stuff like that. If anybody goes to a airlines lounge in Western countries these days, there's always a food collecting or dish collecting robots roaming around, right? So we're starting to normalize that. So I think it's just a matter of time. I think if you go back 10, 15 years ago, these type of devices, smartwatches was not a common thing, right? Today we are normalized to that. So I think we'll get normalized to robots around us all the time. Yeah.
Rajat, he was talking about airline lounges and robots in airline lounges. You're a roboticist. You said 40 million meals. That's phenomenal. What is like one challenge associated with scaling that you think is one of the biggest challenges of scaling robotics, mate?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's hard is like, if you think about the internet and cloud, things are relatively deterministic. If you have some function with some inputs, you'll get an output, right? It's relatively deterministic. I think the real world in physics is a lot more non-deterministic. It's a lot more random, right? So for example, in the food industry, and maybe that's an extreme, right? Like every single day, food is cut differently, it's cooked differently, right? So obviously it's organic on top of that, right? So nature makes it differently. So there's just so much variance that you can get something to work here, but then tomorrow it doesn't work anymore. So that's really where like it's tough. And of course every customer is different, and every country is different, and every site's different. So I think it's a lot less kind of, more input equals more output. It's more like you have to like really kind of reinvent that middle part, that AI and that intelligence layer to actually make for some given input, the output actually work.
Thank you, Rajat. So, Raunak, from an IoT perspective, in the last decade, we have seen so many ups and downs in consumer IoT. We had Apple, like their HomeKit in 2014. Not much has happened since, and then you had Thread and so many standards in the world of consumer IoT. But industrial IoT has been killing it secretly. Why is that?
See, industrial IoT actually solves a much bigger pain point than a home automation system, for example, right? So the opportunity is larger, the value creation is much larger. And because most of B2B buying processes are run around business cases and business case justifications, the moment value creation is large enough in terms of ROIs, adoption just speeds up. It's a very land and expand market as well. So when you deploy in a large, I'll talk about manufacturing, large manufacturing environment, if you prove it out in one section of one plant, scaling to the entire plant or all the plants, all the facilities from a manufacturing perspective, starts becoming automatic. And that's where the real difference is.
Karthee, like when I asked the audience, how many of you have heard of IFT? You were the only one who raised your hand, so the question goes to you, mate. So is there any hope for consumer IoT?
So when you're still talking acronyms, right, that means you're still in the technology domain, or you're not really talking about use cases and whatnot. So when you talk about the physical world of connected things, we already have a bunch of stuff in the home. We just don't call it as IoT. For example, a lot of the homes have this connected thermostats, which is a connected thermostat called Nest, right? We don't call it as an IoT. And then there are connected cameras, whether it is Ring or Google ones and stuff like that, right? So which is connected cameras. So we just don't call it IoT. We just talk about the use cases where it's connected cameras and whatnot. So when the technology is still in this acronym phase, it's still a technology, but I think when it really becomes adopted, nobody knows which form it actually happens. So yeah, so I think it's happening without these acronym monikers tacked on it. Right?
Yeah, in the last decade, there is an Indian way of saying, IIoT. So I thought, I'll squeeze that in. But let's jump into humanoids, guys. So from a humanoids perspective, Karthee, I'll start with you. You've been an early investor in at least one very well-known humanoid company. With humanoids, with robotics, you have safety critical functions. The Robotics Industry Association has well-defined safety standards. Those safety standards have not yet been defined in the world of humanoids. So give me your thoughts on when we are going to see humanoids actually scaling.
Right. So we are investors in Agility Robotics, and until last year, they had to go convince everybody that you need humanoids. And then the last year, everybody's telling people that, okay, humanoids are going to be there. When is it going to be here, right? So some of the perception changes so quickly. So the best way to think about humanoid is that there is a company which started putting warehouses and logistics from scratch, Amazon, right, with the automation in mind. And then they found out that they have this ASRS using Kiva robot that they bought. They have other pick and place stuff, and they found that they got the limit of automation because there's a lot of ad hoc tasks, dexterous tasks that you need to do that you couldn't do it with all the traditional automation. So they needed a different form factor, which is what the humanoids are, right? So if you look at the use case itself, there's a need that a humanoid form factor is probably going to be the best one to do, even in an Amazon type of warehouse use case where it was all purpose built for automation. But if you look at the vast majority of the warehouses and factories, right, so it's all human, built for human spaces, so you need a humanoid form factor. But that said, right, so the adoption in my mind will happen in stages, right? I think wherever it's going to interact very closely with humans, that's where the safety features need to be extremely well thought out, and there are already efforts happening in the industry to create that, and Agility Robotics is driving some of those things. But you have enough use cases where you are in a reasonably self-contained environment where causing safety to humans and others are less of an issue, right? So I think we're going to see it in stages. So Agility is already deployed in 12 customers, and these are use cases where those safety concerns are not as high a need, but I think we're going to get those industry standard of safety brought together for all the adoption, right? But it's coming very quickly. It's not like too far away.
Rajat, you wear two hats on this panel, mate. One, as a roboticist, right? And there you have to be impartial. The second, as an entrepreneur focused on food packaging industry, because I've heard that some of the food that is packaged, airline food that's packaged by you guys, looks like it's being packaged by a Michelin star chef. So with that said, what are your views on humanoids in food packaging, and where do you think humanoids are going to play a role? And are we still going to see, right, specific robotics for specific tasks?
Yeah, so I mean, talking to actually one of the notable humanoid founders, I think he had a really interesting quip about this. Like, if you peer into the future, 10, 20 years, there will be tens of billions of specific robots for like whatever use case, right? I mean, for example, in autonomous vehicles, it would not make sense to have a humanoid driving the car. The car itself is intelligent, right? You don't need a humanoid doing that, for example. Or in Chef's use case, honestly, it doesn't really add much value to like walk around, right? Because, for example, in assembly line, there's stations. So if you have a set of robots in different stations, that kind of solves your problem. So there'll be tens of billions of specific purpose robots, and there'll be billions of humanoids, right, if you peer into the future 10 to 20 years. I think that's very much my view. In our use case, honestly, I don't think it adds much value, right? Because the robots are stationary. There's no value in walking around, right? But on the other hand, in warehouses and other use cases, you can imagine like in a hospital, for example, right? Walking around is quite useful. So I think there's definitely a world for both. I mean, I think what's nice about our use case and our thinking is like, we can be shipping hundreds of robots today, right? We don't need to wait for some science breakthrough on the hardware or the AI side. Like we can be shipping robots today. And I think that's kind of how we think about it. And over time, we get collect production data, training data, and we can really scale to better and better systems. So that's kind of like how we think about it as Chef. Now, I think as an industry, as a robotics industry, I think the question is really the time horizon. I think it's just, of course, it's a new technology. These new technologies take time. And for the founders and the investors who are willing to underwrite a long time horizon, I think it's potentially one of the biggest markets ever, basically. It's just how long of a time horizon are you willing to kind of underwrite?
All right, let's jump on to the next topic, India. Raunak, you're killing it. Again, from an industrial IoT perspective. And give us your perspective on, is it the talent? Is it the amazing technology? Or is it the power of 24/7 services that you offer to the rest of the world? Why India, and why is this differentiated, having a startup in India that has a global presence?
So I think the India advantage is actually quite massive, especially with AI coming through. So two main areas. Number one, we talked about human in the loop in the previous panel. Now, human in the loop is typically going to be high-skilled, vertical specialist, labor, which is going to come at a lower cost, at a better value in a country like India. So we have a massive advantage there. The second is the way full-stack solutions are going to be delivered, right? So full-stack solutions are going to be more or less service-wrapped in sense from a delivery model standpoint as we move from pure SaaS to outcome as a service. And again, who's best at services, right? Globally, we have a massive advantage in India. So I think because of these two, India has a massive advantage, good talent, large quantity and quality of talent that is available. Of course, it'll have to go through the training and the necessary revamping towards the new age, AI-based world, but definitely happening. And if you think about fundamental businesses, right? When you look at competition and differentiation, right? AI is going to make products start looking more and more similar, right? Especially software products and platforms. So when products start looking very similar, then the next most important thing from differentiation is service, right?
Correct.
And that's where India is going to play a great role. And of course, there's data and quality and quantity of data and things like that, which will additionally be moats. But fundamentally, services where India will kill it.
Karthee, you have invested in companies, who have customers in the US and customers in India. What is the dichotomy, or how would you differentiate the customers in India versus the US?
Yeah, so the interesting part, like when I started the Israel office and India office, it was very clear, right? It's like almost like opposite markets. Whereas Israel didn't have any industry, so they had great technology, but they had to go to the US or Europe. Whereas India has actually many of these industries. We have a big auto industry here, we have a manufacturing industry here, we have pharma, we have space and things like that, right? So which basically means and they're all operating at a different structure, different cultural paradigm, different cost structure and whatnot compared to the West, right? So entrepreneurs, especially in the deep tech, especially on some of these automation, robotics, or components that build companies here, they have a local market as well. It's not necessarily the most early adopting market. It's not necessarily the biggest market, but there is a market here, right? And which actually gives the Indian entrepreneurs, Indian companies that start in the space a heads up. We still don't have enough, enough volume of companies coming there, but I think when they do start to come up, there is an inherent advantage as well, right? But the buying pattern in these two markets is culturally different, right? So, this concept of jugaad gets thrown out, which basically means it's like, okay, let's just do something, get things going. Which is how a customer actually does a POC here as well. Okay, just come and put it. No, we're not discussing the economics. We're not discussing anything. Just put it in a line. If it fails, it fails. Okay, you can take it back, type of a thing, right? So entrepreneurs who get used to that deployment model, it takes a little bit of a reset when you go to the US. Whereas US is like, okay, we have to have an RFP, there is a detailed process, there is a, but the outcome is like a $10 million contract is not out of the norm, right? Like you go through all these processes and it's a $10 million contract on the other end of it, right? Whereas here you can get started in a POC quickly and all those things, but then translating into a $10 million contract is not there, right? So what I've seen in the past in some of our portfolio companies here can attest as well is that some of the mechanisms that the muscle memory that you build here sometimes need to be retrained when you think about a US customer and whatnot, right? So anyway, yeah.
Thank you, Karthee. One quick question to you, Rajat, is, hey, brownfield versus greenfield environments for robotics. I have personally seen situations where you have phenomenal technology, you have a solution that does great things in terms of productivity, but then when you set up a robotics field, the civil engineering around the robotics field costs more than the robotic solution itself. So from a chef robotics perspective, literally you can fit into any brownfield environment. How much of a differentiator is that to your success?
Yeah, it's a good point. So I mean, a lot of the automation that's existed to date, to your point, I mean, you have to fully automate the line, for example, right? It's this gigantic piece of equipment. It takes forever to install. There's third-party equipment you have to install. You have to install all this like equipment. It takes forever. It's long timelines. It's risky for the customers, which means long sales cycles. Deployments take forever. It's a lot of CapEx. I mean, ... I mean, it's a lot of issues. And by the way, then if something fails on the line, the entire line's down because you have one kind of point of failure, right? And so I think this has actually been a root cause of failure for many robotics companies. Everything is just hard with that. So I think we try to take very much the opposite approach, which is we're going to have a tiny robot cell. This robot cell is going to be the same footprint of a person. You don't have to kind of retrofit anything, literally anything. It's on wheels. You just slide it onto the line, plug in power, and that's about it, right? So I think this has been very fundamental, I would say, in our success because it's very low risk for customers. They don't have to it's not really betting the farm at all. There's no construction cost, so deployments are very quick. If something fails, you just pull the robot out, which is, by the way, it's already very rare, but in the case it does fail, just pull the robot out. The line itself doesn't go down, right? So I think it's a really exciting approach, and I think I'm seeing a lot more of that in the industry as well, which is cool.
All right, very quick round, next 5 years, right? Raunak, what are you seeing in the world of industrial IoT and robotics in the next 5 years? What does it look like? If we were to have this panel in the next 5 years, what would be different? Go for it.
So we'll be talking about digital native plants in manufacturing. These are plants which are run remotely. Today we have control rooms. We have a whole set of people. I've seen plants like steel plants with 20,000 employees on site. We're going to start seeing digital native plants, especially greenfield plants being put together where there is almost no people on the plant and everything is being done from the head office remotely. We've already seen this start happening with things like maintenance, diagnosis and things like that. There are other use cases as well, and all of this coming together is going to make that happen. And we're going to be talking about digital native plants then.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I would say that robotics is very much having its renaissance moment right now. I mean, in many different kind of perspectives, right? From a labor perspective, labor is harder to find. It's getting more expensive. There's shortages, et cetera. So there's this big tailwind there. From a technology perspective, of course, generative AI and transformers are very powerful, really unlocking the potential of robotics. GPUs are getting cheaper. Robot arms are getting cheaper. I mean, there's all these technology tailwinds. So I think it's a really exciting time, and I think the conversation we're going to be having is how are we going from labor, manufacturing and day-to-day operations in the physical world being done by humans to now being done by robots, and those robots are flexible and intelligent as opposed to the rigid robotics that kind of just do the same thing over and over that we've seen in the last 40, 50 years that you could find in a car factory, right, for example.
Karthee.
So we have 5 to 7 devices now, right, between work and home, phone, laptop and whatnot. I think in 5 years we're going to be interacting with 5 to 7 robots in our daily life, whether at work, whether at home and whatnot. In what form factors we will know, we won't know at this point, but we will know. But we're going to be constantly interacting with 5 to 7 robots on a daily basis, just like we're doing with devices, screens at this point. That's what is going to happen in 5 years.
All right. Look, Mohan highlighted 2 things: the knowledge economy, the blue-collar workers, and AI in the physical world. Rajat said this, that labor is being replaced, by robots. Raunak, you highlighted literally lights out kind of control rooms, all digital. You said you have 20 to 25,000 people running that, but that is going to be replaced. So AI in the physical world is happening. It is accelerating. It's not just linear, it is going to be exponential. And that's something that, I wanted us to bring this in together. Again, I want to thank the panel here for joining this. Thank you again.
Thanks, Sri, for that very interesting conversation. Let's break for coffee. Let's be back by 4:30, and then we can continue with other sessions.